Today we're going to talk about sleep, and this is something that I know a lot of you struggle with because when I asked you, I sent out a little survey. About 80% of the responses I got back was sleep, sleep, sleep. I need help getting my kids sleep. When your kids don't sleep, it can be super hard as parents because you feel like a failure, not only because you know your child's not getting the rest they need, but because you have a shorter fuse because you aren't getting the rest that you need, because they're tired and unable to learn as well and interact as socially with their peers and with other people the next day because they are tired. And because it's just overall, we should be able to get our children to eat and sleep. And in my picky eating solution, which I'll link to below, we covered the 3-step solution to get your child over picky eating, because you can also feel like a failure if your child is picky and won't eat the food you know they need. But today we're going to do pretty much the same thing with sleep. I have a 3-step solution. You're going to want to start with what is easiest for you first. And then if you have a more complex case or you have special circumstances, we'll talk about that at the end. So I'm Kara from Health, Home, and Happiness. For those of you who don't know me, I have been blogging for quite a few years. I started blogging our journey on the GAPS diet, which I actually started for my daughter with autism that didn't sleep. And if you have a child that has autism or is on the spectrum and isn't sleeping, it's just mind-blowing how these children can stay up until 10 at night, wake up every 2 hours for an hour and a half or 2 hours during the night, and then maybe just take a 2-hour nap at 10 the next morning, and then they think they are good to go. That's all the sleep their body is going to be doing. And so sleep is actually what it was driving me insane. I'm one of those people that needs 8 to 9 hours a night to really feel functional. And so having this child that didn't sleep, even as we were progressing after the newborn period, just drove me to desperation. I was so desperate. I was so sleep deprived. That's what started us on the GAPS diet. But anyways, I have 2 other children as well. And so I kind of have kids that have varying degrees of sleep issues. My second born was one of those babies that he slept, I want to say 5 or 6 hours from birth. I co-sleep when I am breastfeeding. And so I remember the first night that he was born, I nursed him in the bed. And then I kind of unlatched him, did my shirt up, and he fell asleep right there. He liked to be about 6 inches from me. He liked being either in the co-sleeper or right next to me in bed. But as long as he could hear me and kind of smell me and sense that I was there, he always slept through the night. I don't think that child ever woke up in the middle of the night. So that's my second born. After my very difficult sleeper, this was kind of reassuring to me that I could actually do this a second time around. And then my third born was kind of a combination of the two, not a bad sleeper, definitely. You'll see, if you look at my videos from 2014, you'll see that this child is always in the pack. He would not take a nap unless he was in the ergo. And he preferred me to be walking around while he took a nap. So a lot of my videos from them have a sleeping baby in them. And by the time I was at my third child, I was pretty relaxed. I'm like, you're getting the rest you need. I'm getting the rest I need. We're all good. So that's my history for the children that I have had, and now we're going to talk about you. Since I've had such different sleepers, I really understand kind of all the different perspectives that people come to me just like, I don't know what I do, no matter what I do, if I'm the perfect parent, my child still will not sleep. Or the other parents that are just like, I don't really get the big deal. You just feed them, change them, put them in their bed, and they eventually go to sleep. Well, and it can be really frustrating if all the moms you're in the play group with are like, I don't see what your big deal is. Yeah, you have to make the room dark, but just make the room dark and just be a little bit more calm. Maybe give your baby a little more outside time and they should sleep. And so it can make you feel really alone and like you're an inadequate parent. But it's really just all babies are different. And we'll talk a little bit about why different babies and different children are different and what we can do as parents to help them sleep. So the first thing that you can do, and I'm just going to start from the easiest to hardest, like there's no reason to start with what's the most difficult at first. Let's go ahead and see if you can get your child to sleep with the easiest solutions. And the easiest solution that I have found are supplements. And so our big one is Tart Cherry Juice, and we use this brand of Tart Cherry Juice. I have it on Subscribe and Save on Amazon. We use it every day, and it is tart, I won't lie. If your kids aren't used to juice, they'll probably like it just fine. So I'll put like an ounce in the bottom of a cup, and then I fill the cup up the rest of the way with a couple ounces of water. And then my kids love it. It's like their treat after dinner, and they think it's great. You can also make it into gummies, which I will link down below, my recipe for that. And I usually add a little bit of elderberry to those gummies as well for their immune system. But the tart cherry, just getting that in, it doesn't matter what time of day you get it, it naturally raises their melatonin levels. And so if kids are having a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep, like I started this when my kids were waking up with the sun. We're up in Montana, so in the summertime, the sun comes up at like 4:30 or 5, and they were getting up at 4:30 or 5, and that was not working for me. So even though they were going to sleep well at night and they were sleeping through the night, they weren't staying asleep. Tart Cherry Juice is really good for any of the sleeping problems. So if you can start introducing that, and I would probably introduce that as early as 6 months, even though I'm normally not a give babies juice person. If your baby's not sleeping and you're having a hard time with that, then I think that the benefits outweigh the risks. Of course, it's up to you to decide what you want to do. And for a baby at 6 months, I'd probably start with just like half an ounce or a quarter of an ounce. They're not going to overdose on this. They might have a little bit of like runny stools if they drink too much, but there's plenty of times that my kids drink more than that 1 ounce of Tart Cherry Juice in a day, and it's fine. Oh, another thing that you can do is put it in popsicles. So I do that during the summertime too. And I will link to that again below. All of these that I'm talking about, I will link below for you. The second, a supplement that can help with sleep is L-Carnosine. And you will find there is one study, this is one of the first dietary supplement interventions I tried for autism. And this works for kids that even aren't on the spectrum. So there's a double-blind placebo-controlled study that shows that supplementing L-Carnosine, which you can either screenshot this or I will link to it below. Supplementing or L-Carnosine in children that had autism showed a lower index score on the autism rating scale, which is like how severe their autism is, and they had kind of a language explosion. So speech went way up, like a statistically significant amount, and their autism severity went down. And so this is L-Carnosine, one of the first supplements I tried. It's a little expensive, and you want to make sure you get the right one. So follow the link or make sure you carefully compare the letters that's on it, because there's a lot of amino acid. This is an amino acid, which is just like a specific, very specific type of protein. So this is an amino acid, and there's a lot of amino acids that are named similar names. L-Carnosine is something I started with my daughter when she was 2, and this didn't quite help the sleeping yet, but it did help her not melt down as much. It's my theory, it says on the bottle that it supports muscle vitality, it's a free radical scavenger. So my theory is that that free radical scavengerness that it's doing is kind of taking out the toxins or binding to the toxins that are in their system and just not overloading their brain with toxins. Where if you think of other people like that are on drugs, I don't know if you've ever seen someone on like Coke or meth or something like that, they aren't sleeping either. And so that is obviously a toxic reaction. They chose to put toxins into their body, and their body is just like wired not sleeping at all and like gonna have really bad sleep. And I feel like almost our toddlers or our babies that aren't sleeping are kind of mimicking some of that. So this L-Carnosine is doing something, it's either doing that, it's either grabbing those toxins out and binding to them, or I think it might have a help with healing the gut. If our gut walls aren't doing what they should be, which is being a very important filter in our body for the foods and everything we ingest and taking the toxins back out, if it's not doing that, then we're going to be letting too much stuff in that's eventually making it to the brain. So you can learn more. I am a gut health blogger, so gut health is kind of my thing. You can learn more about the gut health and leaky gut connection by clicking on the link below. But L-Carnosine is super easy. It's a capsule. And for my daughter, when we first started this, we're down to just 1 capsule a day now. But you just open it up and then you can dump it in food. So I was dumping it in on top of scrambled eggs, and I was even putting it in water. Like for a while, she was obsessed with water with stevia in it. So I'd open a package of stevia and dump that in her little sippy cup of water, and I dump one of these in as well. It's not very it doesn't taste like a lot. You can taste it too. And if you have one child on the spectrum, I would imagine that probably everyone in your family can benefit from this supplement. And so just go ahead and try it, and it might help your kids nap. I remember because I tried it with my daughter and I was putting it in her sippy cups, and sometimes her brother would grab, her brother that's 2 years younger, my good sleeper, sometimes he would grab her sippy cup. And I just noticed on the days, like some days he was sleeping really well for his naps, like around 2-3 when he was starting to give up his naps. And some days he wasn't sleeping as well at all. And then I finally made the correlation. that it's because he was taking the supplement. And so then I started just giving him one a day, and he was getting those restful naps, because naps can be tricky kind of even for a good sleeper when they're on the verge of giving up their naps, or they're learning a lot of stuff, so they're interested in all the things around us. And then finally, our final supplement that is also helping with detoxification, which we just talked about below, is Epsom salt. So Epsom salt in the bath. And this can actually trigger a healing crisis. So if your children have a hard time detoxifying and they're not sleeping well at all, sometimes it'll have the opposite effect. So you want to just start putting a tablespoon of Epsom salt in their bath. And I will link to another video I have where I talk all about Epsom salt. This is what finally turned my daughter sleeping around for the most part. She started sleeping through the night once we started doing Epsom salt baths every night. And so this is, before we started the GAPS diet, we did Epsom salt baths, and she wasn't sleeping super well. She was at least sleeping 5 to 6 hour stretches, which after being up every 2 hours for the past 2 years, I was very welcoming of the 5 hour stretches. So an Epsom salt bath, you just put 1 cup of Epsom salts into a warm bath, try to keep them in it for about 20 minutes. And you can do that as often as is needed. If your child is super sensitive or on the spectrum or even prone to seizures, I would only put in a tablespoon, and I would try it and then not do it for 3 nights and see if you can tell a difference, and then go up and work your way up to 16 tablespoons, which is a cup. So Epsom salt is our third supplement, just adding it to their bath water. And then baths right before bed, we'll talk about this in sleep hygiene, but baths right before bed can lower their body temperature. Even if it's a warm bath, they get out and their body temperature is lowered. And by doing that, they get a little bit more sleepy. That can help them fall asleep as well. So I recommend a Epsom salt bath, pajamas, story, lights out, good night. And we will talk about that in our next section, which is sleep hygiene. Oh, and we will talk about melatonin in our special circumstances at the end of this video. I don't recommend melatonin for everyday use for the average child. I recommend doing that if all else fails and you have carefully weighed the pros and cons, which we will talk about at the end of the video. Next, we're going to talk about sleep hygiene. And this is training the body to get sleepy every night. Your sleep hormones, you can train just like your hunger hormones, as we talked about in the picky eating solution. So you can kind of train your body just like Google Maps. If you have an iPhone, Google Maps will tell you it takes 12 minutes to get to this place, where they're assuming you're going to the same place every Wednesday. Your body does the same thing with hormones. So hormones aren't like nerves that work super quickly. Hormones are just kind of chilling slowly, and they can be trained. It's not as fast as pull your hand away from a hot stove that our nerves are trainable. It's a little bit slower than that, but we can definitely train our sleep hormones. And so that's what we are focusing on with sleep hygiene. And this is what, if you've talked to your doctor, they probably have really pushed the sleep hygiene aspect. And so this is what sleep hygiene is. It's just your nighttime routine that signals your body it's time to wind down. This is also really helpful with our preschoolers, which babies are really susceptible to routine. They generally think like my mom or my dad, my parents are the best thing ever. Of course they want to. Preschoolers are sort of asserting their independence, and they're becoming their own person. Toddlers as well, like the famous no stage, all of that. Having a routine can really override that whole fighting about bedtime, because when they do fight about bedtime, they're going to raise their cortisol. And so when they raise their cortisol, which is their stress hormone, because they're not getting their pajamas on, they're not brushing their teeth, they have to be carried up the stairs, they're having a tantrum because they want to keep playing downstairs. So if we can eliminate that cortisol spike, then melatonin is going to take over, and it's going to be a lot easier for them to sleep. So if you kind of think of yourself, if you were driving home from a late meeting, you're ready to go right to bed after you get home, but then you get in a near miss, like a near car accident, and your adrenaline is spiked, like you just have that fight or flight response. This is the same thing that's happening for our children if we are not in a firm bedtime routine where we don't really deviate from it, and that kind of takes all the power struggle away. So every time that we are having to argue and force children to go to bed and they are getting all worked up about it, it's going to be harder for them to fall asleep. So having that routine is really essential. Like once we establish that routine and it's no longer a fight, this is really helpful for our toddlers and our preschoolers. They won't have that cortisol spike, and it'll be easier for them to fall asleep. Another part of sleep hygiene is limiting blue lights after dinner, and it can be really It can be really tempting, and I know as a parent, this is something that I do often on Friday nights because I'm just tired, is to let them watch TV as you're cleaning up dinner. And that blue light from the TV is something that's going to inhibit that melatonin from being released in their brain. And so if you can limit blue lights, even dim the lights, like if you can even dim the lights in the whole house after dinner, like have a dinner by dim light and candlelight, as quaint as that sounds, it is good sleep hygiene. The candlelight has that amber light, which is opposite of blue light. I know especially some children on the spectrum, it's just not happening. They're not going to go to sleep or go without a tablet after dinner. If you can work towards that, that is definitely something that will help with your sleep hygiene, and you will get that natural melatonin response in the brain. The third aspect of sleep hygiene is to encourage that rest and digest mechanism. This is something that we're biologically wired to do, is once we eat food to kind of rest and then digest it. So if you have kids that maybe they eat a little earlier and then they go out to play again, that's something that maybe you can change your routine around so that your child is eating almost as close to bedtime as possible. And so eating dinner is really the first aspect of the before bed routine. So like dinner, cleanup, bath, story, bed. And so that's using your body's own rest and digest, which is opposite of fight and flight, which is that cortisol response that we just talked about. And so encouraging that whole rest and digest, sending your child to bed with a full stomach so that they can naturally use their body's biology to digest that food, and their body's biology at the same time will encourage them to rest. So I know it's a lot of fun to like do one more thing, especially if dad's coming home right at dinner time and hasn't had time to interact with the kids. But see if you can just flip-flop it a little bit and maybe do your active time before dinner, and then have from dinner on to be dimmed lights, no electronics, quiet, and very rigid to routine. Fourth aspect of sleep hygiene is keeping your routine consistent. So I notice it takes my kids 2 nights to settle back into a routine after I have them out in the evening. So sometimes we do go out. I just know, and I have to accept as a parent, that not only are they going to be tired the next day after we're out late and our routine is disrupted, but the next 2 nights they're going to have a hard time getting back into routine, and it's going to take me longer to put them to bed. It's going to be harder for them to fall asleep, and those following 3 days after we go out at night, they're going to be tired. And so I know this is hard. I know families that are out doing sports, they're doing meetings, they're doing different activities like 3 or 4 nights a week. It's going to be really hard for your child to go to bed at 7 one night and then go to bed at 8:30 or 9 the next night. It's just something that's going to kind of mess with those sleep hormones that we're trying to train. So if you are out 3 times a week, that's just something that your family's committed to, you're not going to change. Maybe consider moving your child's bedtime back. And so if you're out until 8:30, then start as much of your bedtime routine as you can from 8:30 to 9, and then just have your child go to bed at 9 and fall asleep at 9. And hopefully they'll have time to sleep all the way until 7 or 8 the next morning. So having a consistent bedtime so that you can actually get those hormones to not be ramped up, because a lot of activities, especially if your child's in a child care or a child like sporting events that are at 8:30, they're not having those rest and digest hormones that we just talked about. They're going to be riled up, or even if it's not really cortisol, it's not like the stress hormone, but it's just that physical activity is kind of taking your body out of that rest and digest, and it's making them into the whole let's run and have fun. And so that's something that if you can keep your bedtime consistent, just work around your schedule, and maybe it's easier to change your schedule, maybe it's easier to change your bedtime, but it's really going to be very difficult for you to have your child go to sleep at 7 or 8 one night and then 9 or 9:30 the next night, and then back and forth. So just realistic expectations of if their sleep schedule does get disrupted, there's no use fighting about it. Again, that does the cortisol thing, but just kind of being as understanding as you can, and still being firm with your boundaries and still working towards that routine, but being understanding that the next couple nights they are going to have their sleep disrupted. The last aspect of sleep hygiene is that we need to get adequate exercise during the day, and this is just playing outside. We need to get fresh air, and we need to eat well. And so some children won't sleep because they're not eating well, and that's something that as parents we need to maybe button this up a little bit. You can check out my picky eating solution if you're having a hard time with this. If your kids are waking up in the middle of the night hungry or they're absolutely starving in the morning, they might not be eating enough for lunch and dinner. And so if that is the case, then kind of taking care of that aspect of their life, using a parent-directed approach. I know that intuitive eating is politically correct right now. Probably your newborn knows how to eat on demand and eat what's right for them. But if you have a child that's chronically hungry at bedtime, chronically waking up in the middle of the night hungry, and you know they're not eating the calories they need, you can train those hunger hormones as well, which we talk about in lots of other videos. And we'll move on now to gut health. I told you about my daughter in the beginning of the video when she was 2, and I was just about to have her baby brother, and she was still not sleeping in more than 2-hour stretches. She was going to bed when I went to bed. She was waking up every 2 hours. This was just like hard. This was just hard, and it was really exhausting and just emotional for me. I could not get this child to sleep no matter what I did. And believe me, I tried it. I tried the sleep hygiene. I tried the consistent bedtime. I read all the sleep books. Her doctor finally offered to prescribe her sleeping pills. And I'm like, she's 2. I am not prescribing her sleeping pills. I did use Benadryl, and this was under the advice of her doctor. So I was using Benadryl, but still that would get her to sleep at 10. And she would still be up 2 hours later. And I'm like, and even if I gave her Benadryl then again at 12, and this is me admitting, I can't believe I was doing that, but I had nothing else I could do. I was pregnant. I was expecting this new baby anytime now, and this toddler would not sleep. She was exhausted during the day. She was like super behind on all her milestones because it was hard for her to learn. And so I understand this whole sleep desperation. Like I was, you know how like naturally minded I am. I was giving her Benadryl, and it worked initially at 10 to get her to bed when I went to bed. But then if I tried giving it to her at midnight, it wasn't working then. So she was still up from midnight to 2, and then she'd usually sleep 2 to 4:30, and then she'd be up for the day at 4:30. And it wasn't like she would just go play. She was 2. She was climbing all over me. She was stimming because she had autism at the time. It was not working for me. And so I figured it was probably a symptom of autism. Like this is common on the spectrum. But even if your child is displaying something like this, it doesn't necessarily mean they have autism. Some kids are bad sleepers. And gut health is kind of the root problem that I find in most of these kids. So when we talked about the Epsom Salt baths and we talked about the carnosine and the supplements in the first part of this video, we talked about the detoxification system and how if you're not detoxifying, you're getting toxins that are just like hitting your brain, just like a meth addict is having meth hit their brain. It's just they can cross the blood-brain barrier, and they affect your brain, they affect your sleep, and sleeping is obviously part controlled by your brain. And so it's not only the detoxification system and not processing the toxins. You're just like, well, I'm really careful and we don't have a lot of toxins and I don't feed my kid junk food, so I don't think they have an overload of toxins. If your digestive system has been colonized by pathogenic bacteria, they can actually emit toxins. And so these toxins can do all sorts of things, like tell your brain to make tics. Tics are something like Tourette syndrome. They can prevent sleeping, which we're talking about right now. They can send like insane sugar cravings, like you have to have sugar because the bacteria that have colonized your gut, and they're right there, they can just like send stuff right into your bloodstream. And so they are telling your body, hey, we really want sugar, or hey, we really don't want to sleep, or hey, like this is just a byproduct of what I'm doing. I'm just chilling here and eating stuff in your digestive tract, but a byproduct, which is like the bacteria poop of what they are doing, is acting like a drug for you. So fixing your gut health, sealing up leaky gut, starving out those pathogenic bacteria, repopulating them with good bacteria. This is all exactly what worked for me. And this is, I know it's really extreme and it's really hard, but it's also really hard. If your child is having a hard time with sleeping now, it's going to be really hard for them to learn when they're in school. It's going to be really hard for them to meet their milestones. It's really going to be really hard for them to have social interactions because they're just so exhausted. So the sleeping stuff, if you are kind of dealing with it, just like white knuckling through it when they're a toddler, it's going to keep getting harder as they get older. And so fixing their gut health with the GAPS diet is something that I did. If you want to do something less than the GAPS diet, which is really intense, in my Gut Healing Starter Pack, which I'll link to below, I do have a kind of, well, you can try this first, and it's like my fast and easy plan, and it involves adding probiotics and getting rid of some inflammatory foods, but not all of them, and just seeing if you can get rid of wheat and dairy, like major allergens, do lots of probiotics, and then a few different supplements that we talk about in the class. And that is sometimes enough if you don't have a super extreme case like autism. It's sometimes enough to heal their bodies and heal their gut, that they can start up. Once you get the ball rolling, your gut knows how to detoxify. Your body knows how to heal itself. And so once you can kind of take away the overwhelm and all of that, then your body will start doing that on its own. So that's our gut health part of the sleeping solution. It was what really turned my life around, my daughter's life around. And since we're just talking about sleep here, that's what I'm talking about. But everything was so much better. You can watch our autism video if you want. But right now I'm happy to say I have 3 children that sleep really well. They do require different amounts of sleep. So like my daughter that's 11 and she does have special needs still, she has to be in bed by 7:30 and then she's usually up by 7 or 7:30. So she needs almost 12 hours of sleep every night. My son that's 4, we start his bedtime routine at 6. He gave up his nap. And so this is like different kids need a nap and different kids need just more sleep during the night. And so he gave up his nap, and we start his bedtime routine at 6 and he is asleep by 6:30 and he's usually up about 6:30 or 7 the next morning. And then my son that's 9, he needs a little bit less sleep. And so I usually send him up to bed around 8 and I do let him read for half an hour. So 8:30 and then he's usually up by 6:30 or 7. And all of us really, I don't wake my kids up. This is something that I have made a priority in our life. This is something that I was able to make a priority in my life. Like I know that there's some parents working night shifts that have to pick up kids at daycare. I know that your circumstances can all be different than mine. And I'm lucky that I'm able to create a super rigid routine for them to get the sleep that they need. And I do it, honestly, I can admit it's selfish because it's not only better for them, which is not the selfish part, but it's better for me. It's so much easier to parent children that are well rested. And our mornings are so much better when I have happy children coming down the stairs, not grumpy children that I'm dragging out of bed. So I gave you about 20 different options in this video, and hopefully one of them, or many of them, or all of them is attainable for you and will get you on the track to better sleep right away. I've also put everything that I just talked about into a healthy sleep checklist that you can just print out so that you don't forget everything. I know it was kind of overwhelming. I went over a bazillion different things. So go ahead and grab the checklist so that you can start sleeping better tonight.